Hello and welcome to Penguin Book Club. This is a place to come and delve into all those classics you always wanted to read. Today we'll be concluding our 3-day celebration of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, which is celebrating its 200th anniversary since publication. I'd firstly like to welcome Susanna Fullerton as our resident queen of the classics at Penguin Book Club. Susanna has been president of the Jane Austen Society of Australia for the past 18 years. And welcome, Susanna.
Hi.
I'd also like to welcome Sarah Burns, President of the Australian Bronte Association, Louise Ong from the readme.net blog site, and book lover Fred Taylor.
Hello.
And of course, we'd also like to welcome back book club members watching our Hangout on air. And finally, our very special guest for this evening's book club joining us again tonight is co-artistic director of Bell Shakespeare, John Bell. Welcome, John, and thank you so much for being here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Last night, we couldn't stop our discussion on all the incredible characters in this book. It really was hard to cut that discussion short, and today we'll be looking at all the themes in the novel. Before I invite John Bell to finish our last reading for the night, I really would like to give him a heartfelt thanks from all of us here at Penguin Book Club for the way he has transported us into the world of Mansfield Park with his readings for these past 2 nights. Thank you so much, John.
My great pleasure.
Make sure you lovers of literature don't miss out on Bell Shakespeare's up-and-coming production of Henry V starting on the 13th of June. I am really excited about that, so can't wait to see it. John, if I could welcome you for one last time to start off our book club tonight with a reading from Mansfield Park.
The next day came and brought no second letter. Fanny was disappointed. She could still think of little else all the morning. But when her father came back in the afternoon with the daily newspaper as usual, she was so far from expecting any elucidation through such a channel that the subject was for a moment out of her head. She was deep in other musing. The remembrance of her first evening in that room, of her father and his newspaper, came across her. No candle was now wanted. The sun was yet an hour and a half above the horizon. She felt that she had indeed been 3 months there, and the sun's rays falling strongly into the parlour, instead of cheering, made her still more melancholy. For sunshine appeared to her a totally different thing in a town and in the country. Here its power was only a glare, a stifling, sickly glare, serving but to bring forward stains and dirt that might otherwise have slept. There was neither health nor gaiety in sunshine in a town. She sat in a blaze of oppressive heat, in a cloud of moving dust, and her eyes could only wander from the walls marked by her father's head to the table cut and notched by her brothers, where stood the tea-board, never thoroughly clean, the cups and saucers wiped in streaks, the milk a mixture of motes floating in thin blue, and the bread and butter growing every minute more greasy than even Rebecca's hands that had first produced it. Her father read his newspaper, and her mother lamented over the ragged carpet, as usual, while the tea was in preparation, and wished Rebecca would mend it. And Fanny was first roused by his calling out to her, after humphing and considering over a particular paragraph, "What's the name of your great cousins in town, Fan?" A moment's recollection enabled her to say, "Rushworth, sir." "And don't they live in Wimpole Street?" "Yes, sir." "Then there's the devil to pay among them, that's all. There," holding out the paper to her. "Much good may such fine relations do. I don't know what Sir Thomas may think of such matters. He may be too much of the courtier and fine gentleman to like his daughter the less. But by God, if she belonged to me, I'd give her the rope's end as long as I could stand over her. A little flogging for man and woman too would be the best way of preventing such things." Fanny read to herself that it was with infinite concern the newspaper had to announce to the world a matrimonial fracas in the family of Mr. R. of Wimpole Street. The beautiful Mrs. R., whose name had not long been enrolled in the lists of Hymen, and who had promised to become so brilliant a leader in the fashionable world, having quitted her husband's roof in company with the well-known and captivating Mr. C., the intimate friend and associate of Mr. R., and it was not known even to the editor of the newspaper whither they were gone. "It is a mistake, sir," said Fanny instantly. "It must be a mistake. It cannot be true. It must mean some other people." She spoke from the instinctive wish of delaying shame. She spoke with a resolution which sprung from despair, for she spoke what she could not believe herself. It had been the shock of conviction as she read. The truth rushed on her. And how she could have spoken at all, how she could even have breathed, was afterwards matter of wonder to herself. Mr. Price cared too little about the report to make her much answer. "It might be all a lie," he acknowledged, "but so many fine ladies are going to the devil nowadays that way that there was no answering for anybody." "Indeed, I hope it is not true," said Mrs. Price plaintively. "It would be so very shocking. If I have spoke once to Rebecca about that carpet, I am sure I have spoke at least a dozen times, have not I, Betsy? And it would not be 10 minutes' work." The horror of a mind like Fanny's, as it received the conviction of such guilt, and began to take in some part of the misery that must ensue, can hardly be described. At first it was a sort of stupefaction, but every moment was quickening her perception of the horrible evil. She could not that. She dare not indulge a hope of the paragraph being false. Miss Crawford's letter, which she had read so often as to make every line her own, was in frightful conformity with it. Her eager defence of her brother, her hope of its being hushed up, her evident agitation, were all of a piece with something very bad. And if there was a woman of character in existence who could treat as a trifle this sin of the first magnitude, who could try to gloss it over and desire to have it unpunished, she could believe Miss Crawford to be the woman. Now she could see her own mistake as to who were gone, or said to be gone. It was not Mr. and Mrs. Rushworth. It was Mr. Rushworth and Mr. Crawford. Fanny seemed to herself never to have been shocked before. There was no possibility of rest. The evening passed without a pause of misery. The night was totally sleepless. She passed only from feelings of sickness to shudderings of horror, and from hot fits of fever to cold. The event was so shocking that there were moments even when her heart revolted from it as impossible, when she thought it could not be. A woman married only 6 months ago, a man professing himself devoted, even engaged, to another, that other a near relation, the whole family, both families connected as they were by tie upon tie, all friends, all intimate together. It was too horrible a confusion of guilt, too gross a complication of evil, for human nature not in a state of utter barbarism to be capable of. Yet her judgment told her it was so. His unsettled affections wavering with his vanity, Maria's decided attachment and no sufficient principle on either side gave it possibility. Miss Crawford's letter stamped it a fact. What would be the consequence? Whom would it not injure? Whose views might it not affect? Whose peace would it not cut up forever? Miss Crawford herself? Edmund? But it was dangerous, perhaps, to tread upon such ground. She confined herself, or tried to confine herself, to the simple, indubitable family misery which must envelop all, if it were indeed a matter of certified guilt and public exposure. The mother's sufferings, the father's, there she paused. Julia's, Tom's, Edmund's, there a yet longer pause. They were the two on whom it would fall most horribly. Sir Thomas's parental solicitude and high sense of honour and decorum, Edmund's upright principles, unsuspicious temper, and genuine strength of feeling made her think it scarcely possible for them to support life and reason under such disgrace. And it appeared to her that as far as this world alone was concerned, the greatest blessing to every one of kindred with Mrs. Rushworth would be instant annihilation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John.
Good. Great fun
Thank
to
you,
be.
John. Thank you.
Susanna.
Well, that fascinating piece that John read, where the elopement or the adulterous behaviour of Maria Rushworth and Mr. Crawford is exposed to Fanny and to the world, is a fascinating passage in the novel. And I think it leads into one of the very important themes in the novel that we do need to discuss tonight. And that, of course, is the idea of morality in this book. Fanny is shocked to the core by this elopement, by her cousin's behaviour, and also, of course, by Mr. Crawford's behaviour. She calls it a sin of the first magnitude, something so horrible she can hardly bear to contemplate it. But clearly, Maria has contemplated and has done it and has run off with a man who is not her husband. So let's talk about the morality in Mansfield Park. To a first-time reader like you, Fred, is this a sombre part of the novel? Is it perhaps slightly off-putting because it is a novel that examines morality and the choices that people make according to moral certitudes of the time? How did you respond?
To me, particularly after you read Pride and Prejudice before you start reading this one, before you start reading Mansfield Park, it certainly comes across as a far darker type of story, and particularly in terms of morality as well. And for my mind, for pretty much most of the characters, there's only Edmund and Fanny who really, you'd say, would be sort of morally championing the right way, so to speak. And all of the other characters seem to have some sort of a flaw or a fault with their morality that actually ends up being quite interesting, though, I think, as well.
Yes, so the various moral faults of the characters are very interesting and also, I think, debatable. I mean, Mrs. Price, for example, who's more concerned about the shredding of her carpet than she is about the shredding of her niece's reputation. Is she morally at fault? Is she a reasonable mother? How does she stand on the moral spectrum within Mansfield Park? I think Jane Austen makes us think about all of these characters and where they stand morally. And Sarah, you know, we were talking before about the ending of the novel when Sir Thomas reflects on the fact that he has not taught his daughters the right, correct, moral, ethical behaviour. I think he comes to see his mistake, but do his daughters?
I think Julia, there's a bit of a change there, but poor old Maria has left Mrs. Norris in purgatory, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, what a way to go.
No.
Is the morality of this novel off-putting to the first-time reader? I mean, I've now read it so many times it's hard to even remember what the first reading of Mansfield Park was like. You know, I read it every couple of years and adore it more every time I. But for somebody approaching this novel for the first time, is it too morally serious, too ethical as a novel for a modern reader? What do you think, Letitia?
I think I found, as you know, I found this book difficult to be when I first started reading it, and I think it's something that I touched upon talking to Louise earlier, that it was very difficult to like the characters initially, and I think part of it is this morality that is so foreign almost to us in some ways. Although we have these ideas that it's wrong to cheat on someone, we certainly. There isn't this sort of moral like doom and gloom if such things happen nowadays. And then of course you have the very strict and moral sort of Fanny and Edmund, who are essentially the hero and heroine of the piece, whereas I think, like Fred, I've been very much traditionally used to Jane Austen characters who aren't perfect and develop and come to realise things in much the same way that probably I do in life, stumbling around. So for me that was quite difficult to begin with. I
think something that many readers find off-putting is when Edmund and Fanny get together and criticise the morals of other people, particularly Mary Crawford, and they do seem to be too censorious. And in our current age, when adultery and relationships and marriages that last a week and things like that fill the magazines of the day. Perhaps we're a lot less censorious about all of that than they were in Jane Austen's era. What do you think, Louise?
I agree, and I think more than any of her other novels, for Mansfield Park, we're used to Jane Austen giving us a hook, somebody that we like, that we can relate to, that we can probably empathise with. And at the beginning we're given, gosh, a whole lot of characters that aren't really that likeable, and she makes it pretty clear that we're not to like them. Then we get Fanny and Edmund, and we go along with them thinking, okay, we've got hope here, we've got hope. But then when they start criticising, you think, wait a minute, I'm not quite sure whether I'm with them either. And so in that way, I think Jane Austen sets a very clever scenario, because she sets a very neutral path where we're going to then discuss morals. So we don't actually necessarily like any of those characters and are going to be swayed. We've got a really neutral platform. That's how I interpreted it.
Now, one of the things that Fanny so disapproves of in the novel is the theatricals, the acting of lovers' vows. And for many a modern reader, they read this book and think, well, what on earth is wrong with putting on a play? It seems a perfectly harmless entertainment. But Fanny disapproves. Edmund also disapproves until he's sort of seduced into acting with Mary Crawford. And you know, for a modern reader, this can be a puzzling part of the book. Now, part of the problem is that Sir Thomas is away and in danger, and his children and his family are indulging in a frivolous form of entertainment when they should perhaps be more worried about his safety. Maria also is in a very difficult position as an engaged woman, not yet married. Everyone involved in the theatricals knows of her engagement, but it's not really formally announced. So she's in a very in-between position, and taking on theatrical roles is not something that really goes with her rather difficult position. And then, of course, there's the play that they choose. It's got some rather scandalous parts in it, those acted by Mary Crawford and Maria. You know, it's really giving them a chance to pretend to be people that they are not. And Fanny never does that in the novel. Henry Crawford is a good actor because he's always pretending to be somebody that he's not. So the theatricals are an entrancing part of the novel, but they're also a difficult part of the novel, I think, and we are made to think about what on earth is going on in these theatricals. Oh, and the other thing that needs to be mentioned is that at the time, private theatricals had a very bad name for causing elopements and adulterous behaviour. And Jane Austen is drawing on that when she has all of her characters act in lovers' vows. And of course, Maria has just made a vow to be the faithful wife of Mr. Rushworth. And that's not a vow she's going to keep in this novel. Do you all enjoy the theatricals section of the book?
Yeah, I thought it was like a little microcosm. It was a little micro-society where everything was happening. They were able to take away their inhibitions because the boundaries had been removed by Maria's father, well, the main
Mr. Rushworth.
Thank you, Mr. Rushworth. So, yeah, they didn't have those boundaries anymore, and it was like their own little world.
Yes.
But Mrs. Norris getting so involved is interesting too. That she's supposed to be the moral guidance.
She fails completely to see that there might be anything wrong at all in the play, and is astonished when Sir Thomas comes home and burns all the copies of it. Because
she's the winner in the end with all that green baize.
I found it hard though. The fact that Fanny and Edmund so opposed the play was one of the things I think makes it hard to relate and kind of like the characters as well. So it might be something that over the ages has become a little less relevant.
Yes.
But it certainly was. It's one of those points that we were talking about before, is that it made it quite difficult to relate to the characters because they're so straight and narrow.
And so disapproving. Yes. Although Edmund does weaken, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. I think Fanny does too. That piece that John read, you felt for her because she's starting to think, well, maybe Henry Crawford isn't as bad as all that. And this news actually proves that really he hasn't changed. He is the cad that he always was. So that also was very difficult to read again, as well as for her to go through.
Yes. Now, one of the great guardians of morality, of course, in that era was supposed to be the church. And Edmund, the hero of this novel, is going to become a minister. In fact, he does. He becomes a clergyman during the course of the novel. So clearly he is supposed to be a guardian of morality. And this is very much a novel about the church. Mary Crawford can't bear the thought of marrying a minister, so she tries to persuade him not to become a clergyman. She says, go into the Navy, try the law, anything but a clergyman and nothing. And we as readers are supposed to condemn Mary Crawford for that. But of course, a lot of people today are not nearly as religious as they were in Jane Austen's era. And I personally would not want to marry a clergyman. So I've got a problem with Edmund's profession in this novel. Do any of you share that view? Do you? How do you respond to Edmund as both a hero and a clergyman in this novel?
I think it's because clergymen are often in these novels, including Jane Austen's other novels, the comic or the annoying characters. And
Mr. Collins.
Yes, Mr. Collins.
Elton.
So to make Edmund, a clergyman and the hero of the novel was again just such a really interesting tact in this book, and again one of those things that jars a little bit, and makes it actually quite hard to think of him as the romantic lead or hero of the novel.
Well, she makes Henry Tilney in Northanger Abbey a clergyman, but you never see him at work as a clergyman, and so it's very easy to forget his profession and just delight in gorgeous Henry, who's a wonderful hero. But we can't forget it, can we, with Edmund Bertram? Jane Austen won't let us forget, and Mary can't forget that he is becoming a clergyman in the course of the novel.
Well, she dances with him at the ball, and this will be the last time she'll dance with him because he's about to be ordained, and she won't dance with him then.
But she fails to change his mind. He sticks to his guns, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Although it has to be noted that what other choice has Edmund? He's got a family living. It's going to bring him an income for the rest of his life. He has no other job opportunities. The church was a very convenient position for younger sons in Jane Austen's day. So what are Edmund's other options? But do you feel he's very sincere as a clergyman, that he is genuinely wanting to be a clergyman?
I think so. I think he's accepted that. That's his role, and he doesn't fight it. He doesn't go looking for something else. He works towards it. There's that awful dilemma when he's trying to work out, does Mary love him enough to leave London or to stay with him? And he's not quite sure if she's expecting him to go to her or she'll be happy to stay with him. And of course we know London wins.
You might not be the best
terrible clergyman's wife.
Oh goodness.
Sorry, Fred, your comment?
Sorry, I was just going to say that he might not be the best judge of personality, so he's after Mary most of the novel, and then he's really good friends with Henry for most of it as well.
He is, yes, yeah. Well, Henry's a likeable chap, as I said last night. He's got charm. I like Henry.
Well, he's very pleased when the carriage is there, when they go to dinner at the Grants and he sees the carriages there.
Yes.
Henry's back.
Yes. Now, Edmund, of course, is not only a clergyman, but he's the hero of this novel. And one of the important themes of this book is, of course, love. Fanny is in love with Edmund almost from the start of the novel. Mary, I think, falls in love with Edmund. Maria falls in love with Henry. Mary falls in love with Edmund. There are all these different relationships and love relationships within the novel. How successful is Mansfield Park as a love story? I mean, there's no doubt about Pride and Prejudice. You're swept up in the romance of Elizabeth and Darcy, and you're so utterly thrilled when they end up together at the end of the novel. But does this happen with Mansfield Park? What do you think, Louise?
Oh, I definitely think it's a love story. I think, we hear about Fanny when she declined. I mean, we know that whether she knows or not, that she loves Edmund from the beginning, and we kind of follow that. There's kind of hope and glimmer, and you know, something's going to twinkle along there, and Edmund just needs to realise that. So I think there is that building of the climax. You know, so many things are thrown in their way, and Fanny declines another proposal, but it takes the whole story for Edmund to realise that he actually does love Fanny, and that's a really good choice. And I think with Austen we often see a whole range of different marriages, you know, from the beginning with the three sisters that marry very differently, you know, very well, you know, quite their level and, as they would say, underneath their level, and the what happens because of that. I think, yeah, there's a lot of love in there.
Yes. I love the moment in the novel when Edmund is writing the note to Fanny and she comes into the room and she saves the note. All he's written on it is "My very dear Fanny," and
Yes.
treasures.
That's all he needs.
Any girl who's fallen in love will treasure a note that has been written to her, and she puts it away with her most special possessions. And I think that's a moment when we really see how much in love Fanny is. And of course, there's wonderful symbolism in the gift that Edmund gives her. He gives her a cross to wear around her neck. She then tries to put a chain given to her really by Henry, although it seems to have come from his sister. And it's so symbolic that that chain will not fit through the cross. Yeah. It's clear that Henry is not the right size, he's not the right man, he's not the right fit for Fanny, whereas Edmund is, and she treasures that cross, and the chain, the original chain from Henry, means absolutely nothing. But when Edmund buys a chain, it fits his gift, and it's all part of the love that he has for her. But he just doesn't realise at that time that it's romantic love.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, it unites the two men that she loves most in the world, the two people, William and Edmund. So
yes, yeah. Sorry, the cross, of course, is from her brother, but it's the chain that comes from Edmund that fits the cross. So it all ties in so wonderfully.
Once again, a little bit like the Cinderella analogy, that, you know, it fits the rags to riches, and then the shoes, the chain fitting.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think we can definitely all agree it is a love story, as Jane Austen, you know, she'd let us down if it wasn't. I can't thank you all for being here today to read our wonderful Mansfield Park. You've been wonderful the past 3 nights. We've had incredible readings from John Bell. We've had discussions we can't seem to stop, but I always have to be the bearer of bad news that our time is up. But I hope that you've all enjoyed our special Penguin Book Club celebration of the 200th anniversary of Mansfield Park. We certainly love Jane Austen at our Penguin Book Club, and so it's been really great to celebrate such a special moment in the history of Jane Austen's books. So our next book club is on the 22nd of May, and we are going to be reading one of my all-time favourite books, which is Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. So do grab yourself a copy and join us for Penguin Book Club. Thank you all so much for great discussions over the last 3 days, and we hope to see you all again next Penguin Book Club.
Thanks.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.